looks like we're going to have a very strong turnout for this call, and it's hot topics. Not surprising, but pleased to know that we have lots of participation. And it looks like we might have some people that are new to our calls. So when I walk through the agenda, I'll just give you a quick framework to make sure you know who we are and what we're doing here as well. But we're going to dive right in because we have a lot of ground to cover today. And if we need to, we can go for longer than the usual hour if there's questions in the queue and people want to keep going. So plan on that. And we won't go more than a half an hour after the regular call. So no more than an hour and a half total. So let's dive in quickly. Matthew, why don't you give us a quick status on the federal funding updates?
All right, thanks. So it is Thursday afternoon. We are roughly 36 hours left on the current continuing resolution that is funding the government until it expires Friday at midnight. So there's about 36 hours left to pass another continuing resolution that would continue to fund the government. If that doesn't happen, then there would be a shutdown starting Saturday midnight. So where things kind of stand right now, so the GOP in the House, their plan is they have a continuing resolution that they're planning to vote on today. It would keep the government funded through, I believe it's February 16th. The continuing resolution, in case folks haven't been on the calls before, just keeps the government level funded. So everything at the current the current funding levels. There's some other things in there. They would fund the children's health insurance program, which has been kind of a sticking point for a while. It would fund that for 6 years. It would delay some of the Obamacare taxes, and those are all things that they've added in to try to have something for everyone, for some Democrats to bring them on board, for conservatives, just to obviously to buy them time to try to come up with a bigger plan that would deal with things like immigration has been a big sticking point that the sides are trying to reach some kind of a compromise on for which folks have probably followed for the Dreamers for DACA to try to reach some kind of a compromise on that, and especially on the budget caps. So unless they reach an agreement, there would be automatic cuts to both defense spending and domestic spending. So they're trying to reach an agreement that would lift those caps, and that's obviously the big picture thing that we're hoping for, because it would allow more funding so they could plus up the funding for housing counseling. It's really unclear right now if the Republicans have the votes either in the House or the Senate. In the House, it looks like the Democrats are going to, as a block, vote against it. So that gives the Republicans about 20, I believe the number is 24 Republican votes that they can lose. There may be one or two Democrats who vote for it, but it gives them, roughly 20 to 25 Republican votes they could lose. The Conservative Freedom Caucus has kind of at least postured and said that many of them won't support it unless there's some changes to it. So the bottom line is it will come up for a vote in the House almost certainly today, and will be a very close vote, but could pass the House of Representatives. In the Senate, it's even tougher because they would need to get to 60 votes. They have a 51-49 majority. They would need to get to 60 votes to avoid a filibuster. At least 2 Republicans have already come out against it, so they don't even have 50 votes at the moment. So they would need to bring over at least 11 Democrats to support it. Their idea is to try to pick off some Democrats in kind of red states or states that Trump won, who are up for re-election in this year. But it's very unclear whether they could get it through the Senate. Kind of as an aside, but the president threw things a little bit of gum in the works today by saying he didn't think the bill should include funding for the children's health insurance program. They've kind of walked that back, but it's a thing that kind of throws a wrench in things. Just as kind of an aside, but something at least I find interesting is, so betting markets, you can gamble on basically anything, including politics. So they have it as 50-50 that the government will be shut down on Monday, which has gone up 18 points today. So as of today, people who are wagering on it are evenly split on whether the government will be open on Monday. So we will see. The big picture, as I said, is, shut down or not, and there's a lot of reasons to hope against a shutdown, but in the big picture, what we ultimately are working towards is lifting those budget caps, making sure there's more funding for HUD programs generally, and then making sure that once, assuming there is a deal in the near future, that we get funding for housing counseling raised at least to the current 2017 levels. So I think that is all I've got, Bruce.
Yeah, and just to mention, I think that we talked with Charlie Dent 2 weeks ago, who's key on the Appropriations Committee and has been a champion. If the numbers get raised, he's very committed to going back to try to get our funding level for HUD housing counseling back to $55 million. So that's a critical piece in all this, and he was terrific in our conversation with him, and so hopefully at some point all these things align, and he can use his considerable influence on that. So hopefully that will be successful. Okay, so on a different front, a number of us met with HUD senior staff. I think we've talked about this on calls in the past. One of the opportunities for growth for housing counseling is in the FHA field. And this is, of course, where most of the low and moderate income and communities of color lending is happening in this country. And it reflects a little bit of the infrastructure and a lot of the flexibility, especially on credit and the underwriting. And interestingly enough, it's not really where we see most of the action in our housing counseling work. So the idea has been, and there are a number of us talking about this, so NHRC and also the Coalition of HUD Intermediaries, but the idea is to integrate housing counseling much more effectively in the origination of loans, and then once the loans have been made, in the servicing, and when people get into trouble, effectively get people back to counseling as early as possible. And then finally, where there's a lot of problems for the FHA fund in the reverse mortgage side, the HECM loans, thinking about, is there a strategic model that would get people, as soon as they're indicators of problems, to counseling programs and help us work with some solutions. So there's a lot of detail that fits in underneath that, but I think the bottom lines are: are there ways to build in mechanisms to get people to counseling, but also are there ways to pay for the counseling? And we're deeply aware that it's not helpful to programs to increase the flow of clients if they're not paying. There's not a funding model that goes with this. So the goal in this meeting was to meet with the new leadership at HUD who work in FHA and see if we can't start laying the groundwork for a conversation like this. So we met with Dana Wade, who's the Assistant Secretary for FHA, and we also had Alfonso Marzal, who is the Senior Advisor to the Secretary and works especially on how to make FHA financing issues work. He also met with us this summer at the Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting that we did in DC, our national meeting, and spent quite a bit of time with us, and was very helpful in this meeting. And of course, Sarah Jarek and her team was in the meeting as well. They were, and she was her usual, very positive, very helpful self. The short of it is that, and the team that we had, I'm not going to remember everybody who was in the room, but was Cora Fulmore, from the Florida Housing Counselor Network, and longtime trainer and counselor, and also works with Counselors Corner. Simone Griffin from Home for USA, Linda Ingram from Beyond Housing. There were two people from NeighborWorks there. Lori and Nicole, Lot Diaz from Unidos US, and we really kind of presented kind of how counseling works, how it would work on the pre-purchase side, on the delinquency and default side, and in reverse mortgage. And the idea was, can we get a conversation going that would really lead to some programs and some potential funding. There was clearly lots of interest and enthusiasm about it. There was, I think, a lot of excitement in the room when counselors were talking about the actual engagement of the work and giving examples of cases and how concrete and effective we can be. So that part was very, very good. Where I tried to guide the conversation into thinking about incentives and things where we might tap into the FHA fund, Dana Wade said very clearly, highly unlikely because the fund is under so much pressure, but that she'd be open to looking at numbers on this. And I think the case that we try to make is that that with certain strategic uses of housing counseling, you reduce the delinquencies, you reduce the false, the declines and the cost of running the program, and as a result, it more than pays for itself. So we have to figure out how to document that and figure out how to make that conversation go, or figure out other funding mechanisms. So the short of it was a high value meeting. Well, I think we had made clear, we got a clear commitment that this conversation will keep going, but we have some real work to do on the funding side. But we will see that work, and there's many of us working in this field to try to make that a successful part of the conversation. So I think that's my kind of summary of the meeting, and we'll have a chance to do a little bit more on that in the future, and we'll certainly keep you all up to date. I just want to take one quick minute, and I know that some of the people on the call are people who haven't been on our calls in the past, and so wanted to just make sure you gave you a quick context of who we are and what we're doing here. So this is the National Housing Resource Center. We are 5.5 years old. We're an advocacy program for the nonprofit housing counseling community. And we do a lot of work to identify and create funding opportunities for housing counseling, create new programs, provide information about existing successful programs, new products, to make housing counseling work more effectively. We're doing a lot of work on trying to improve technology in the housing counseling field, and the communication and the new client management systems. We are doing a lot of work in trying to increase the visibility of housing counseling in the public and in local markets. But the idea is that we're sort of out there to make it grow, and there's 1,900 HUD-approved housing counseling agencies across the country. You're delivering services, excellent high-quality services in every congressional district in the country. And this should represent some real power and some ability to influence things. And so we work to get a seat at the table in these conversations. And I think the good news is that this has been a highly successful 5 years, and we've accomplished a lot. But we're painfully aware that there's plenty more to do, and that's kind of why we exist. So with that, I think, yes? Okay. So our next call will be with Sarah Jarique. So she's the head of Office of Housing Counseling at HUD, and it'll be February 1st at the usual time, 1 o'clock Eastern. And we haven't had her for a number of months, but for those of you that have been on calls with her or have been in meetings with her, she's deeply insightful about our industry and our work, and will come not only with the HUD perspective, but also her years in the industry and a kind of bigger overview of our work and what we need to accomplish. So we always look forward to these calls. So if you are, you're welcome to join us for that. I think Matthew's going to send out a link.
Yep, folks should have just got the link in the, I sent it out with the chat function, so there's a link there that you can use to register.
So that's an early registration opportunity, woohoo! And if you are interested in being part of our bigger effort for the National Housing Resource Center, you can always sign up on our list if you haven't signed up already. So if you're not getting emails from Matthew and from me, then you're not signed up. And you can go to our website, which is hsgcenter.org. So www.hsgcenter.org. And upper right-hand corner, there's a mailing list sign up, and you can click your way through and sign up. So thanks for that, Matthew. So let's move on quickly to the to our main panel here. So we've got a good team of people who have been working on the certification test. Some of them have taken it and have been training on it and have been collecting information on the field of what their networks are doing. And we are glad to have everybody on the call today. So we're going to start out with John Bonin, who is a longtime trainer in the housing field and has worked for RCAC and for NeighborWorks and more. And John, are you with us?
I am. Thank you.
Excellent.
Bruce.
Good. Dive in.
All right. Thanks, Bruce. Hi, Matthew, and hello, everybody. Let me just quickly refer everybody that to a web link that I created I created that contains a recorded webinar done for RCAC on the test taking process. And I encourage you, if you're interested in the logistics of that test taking process, watch that. We aren't going to go through that here. In that same video, I also spend a little bit of time on explaining my experience with the test taking process and the way that the exam, both the practice exam and the actual exam, give you clues as to where you need to study better. So I encourage you to look at that video and take the clues that are developed and explained in that video and use them to help yourself study better. As a side note, I'll tell you that I did not do well in the practice exam dealing with foreclosure or post-purchase issues because there was so much memorization needed to align certain programs with certain intake procedures and so on and so forth. And I found that I had to actually create my own study guide materials from the HUD study guide to make it easier, just the way I think, to bullet by bullet, put it into a format that I could memorize and then recall at an instant notice. So don't be shy about using your cursor and copying materials from the study guide and creating your own materials. The study guide uses, as you all have experienced, narration between this hypothetical counselor and a hypothetical client to describe issues, and embedded in those discussions are important facts. So it's a good practice to pull out those facts and drop them into a new piece. As for actual question formats, I found, as I have said in that video, that 80% were singular focused questions, meaning it was just on the topic of fair housing, and it was really an easy decision as to which of the four answers were correct or incorrect. And I'd say another 10% were multi-focused questions, meaning they incorporated more than just a single focus on a topic, but a topic from two areas. Maybe it was tenancy and fair housing, and you needed to know within that question, you needed to be able to recall your knowledge from tenancy issues to fair housing as well. And then another one dealt with home ownership, where you needed to know mortgage insurance premiums and rules, along with housing affordability, which are two separate topics in the study guide. But in about 10% of the questions, I found that they were multi-layered questions where you really had to dissect and figure out what elements am I trying to focus on. And then another final tip or comment I would like to mention is that there are several multi or two-step math questions. So they would be questions that might be focused on knowing what the right housing ratio is based upon using a person's income, applying what you in your mind need to recall as the correct housing ratio for that particular loan product type. And then at the same time, be able to subtract someone's debts from a DTI figure and come up with which is the lower number or the correct number for someone's housing payment. So I'd say 10% of the questions required a two-step math process where you need to know first how to take 33% of something, and then secondly, how do you take 33% but then compare it to another factor which involves some sort of subtraction or something like that. So Colleen, that's what I have right now. Do you want to jump in and add some other thoughts, please?
Let me just jump in quickly. One quick thing is that we sent out the link to John's video. It went out a couple weeks ago, but we just sent it out this morning in the reminder on the email, so people have access to it there as well.
Okay.
Colleen, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce, and thanks, John, as well. So good morning from Montana, everyone. My name is Colleen Phillips. I'm listed here as representing NeighborWorks Montana, and I hope I do that well. But I actually do work for an agency out of Helena, Montana, Rocky Mountain Development Council, and I've been a counselor for 4 years. So I did take the exam. I have completed it, and I have passed it. I took the exam about 15 minutes after you could. I signed up early. I took it in August. I was really excited just to get it done and out of the way. So I will tell you, I'm just going to share briefly some tips as I remember them from taking the exam. John had lots of great input, John, so thank you for that. So I will tell you the training that I did prior to that, I completed all of the HUD training modules. So that was both the interactive, and I printed and used the study guides as well. I also attended an RCAC training class last May. I was not able to schedule and participate in any of that NTI classes, but the RCAC class was very helpful for me. I took the practice exam no less than about 16 times. During the course of that, those questions never changed. I'm not sure if people know that, but the questions did not change. They remained the same. But of course, you don't know if you answered them correctly or not. So the reason that I took it so many times was I was just trying to change up my answers just to see how it would then tell me if I needed some additional study or additional or significant. So I was kind of just playing around with the exam. Certainly did help me, though, I will tell you that much. So the areas of concern for me, remember, I've only been doing this 4 years, so I know that there are individuals who might be on this call today who have been doing it a lot longer. But for me personally, fair housing, foreclosure, and tenancy were my areas of weakness because I don't counsel in those areas. So like a lot of you or your staff, I felt a little frustrated on the front side being asked to test out of areas that I don't do counseling because I wasn't sure how I could prepare for it. But I will tell you that HUD certainly did put some time and energy and effort into providing the training, and everything that you need to know to complete this exam is on that website. So if you have not yet, if you're in line to take the exam and you haven't completed the training modules and such, that's the first place that you need to go. Absolutely. There are no trick questions on the exam, if that makes sense. So specifically some of the areas in fair housing for me that I remember being difficult with regard to the history of civil rights and housing discrimination. Of course, there is a timeline, so you need to know the acts and the Supreme Court rulings. There were a number of questions on the exam about those, and if you don't study those and have a clear way that you have been able to memorize those might be difficult for you. They were, at least for me. Understand your protected classes, understand the terminology that's being asked with regard to fair housing violation and complaints. Certainly be familiar with fair housing organizations and what they do. Again, that's all provided in the training as well. Really get a clear understanding of the fair housing complaint process, meaning who can file those claims and what are the steps. There's a number of steps involved. That was something that I remember being difficult, and it certainly was on the exam as well. Be familiar with affirmatively furthering fair housing. There are some particular steps, plans, and rules. That's a great area to update or study if you're not familiar. Foreclosure was a tough one for me. A lot of memorization. So understand the terminology, but also what is a HELOC? What's RESPA? What's TILA? What's a HOPA? What's HHF, the hardest hit funds. So familiarize yourself with those and get a good feeling for what those mean, because oftentimes they don't spell out, they'll just ask you a question. They'll say, in this situation, what is it? Does this document, is it a RESPA or is it TILA? So that's something that they don't say, is this a Real Estate Settlement Act or is this Truth in Lending? When answering the questions, pay attention to, so if they're walking you through a foreclosure question, make sure you pay attention to the loan type that they've referenced, right? So the steps are not always the same depending on what the particular loan type is. So be familiar with that as well. Understand the difference between a judicial and a non-judicial foreclosure. Understand the steps involved when evaluating the loss mitigation process. So if you are a foreclosure counselor and you're beginning to meet with someone, what are the questions that you ask? One of the things that I figured out quite quickly, and again, I've only been doing this for 4 years, but during the course of that time, I was taught a particular way, or perhaps I would like to think that I do it the way that was right, but I felt like as I started studying HUD's information, it didn't align with how I was doing things as far as steps go, and I'm going to encourage you to set aside the things you think you know and simply memorize what it is that HUD wants you to know. That'll be a great tip for you as well. With tenants,
can you just say
yes.
where that hit? There were a couple places in the test where you said that the timing of the. Yeah.
Certainly. So one of the ones that held me up based on what I do, and Bruce, thank you for asking that question, is, for example, if someone is coming in and you're meeting with them and you're counseling with them to determine if they're ready for home ownership, what are the steps? And for me personally, I would say that a person absolutely comes and meets with me, and then they attend homebuyer education, and then they seek pre-approval on a loan to determine affordability, and from there they would begin looking at homes. And so HUD that's not the steps that HUD has. So they are different, and I won't try and tell you what they are because, again, in my mind, I don't want to tell you wrong. So look that up and know what those steps are for sure. So those are some of the ones that I kind of had to set aside. Great question. For tenancy, I don't do rental counseling, so it's important to know types of leases and types of tenancies. For example, is it written, oral, contractual? What is tenancy at will compared to tenancy at sufferance? So have a good idea. I even got some questions on renter's insurance. What does it cover? What's the difference between actual versus replacement? So that would be a great thing. Sometimes we think we just know those things, and it was interesting for me to figure out that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. Understand eviction processes, the steps and the timelines. Interestingly enough, there were even questions, and this falls under, let me think, it would fall under probably home ownership, emergency plans. What should an emergency plan look like? And that's all covered in the study guide. That was one of the areas that I skimmed over because I felt confident that maybe I thought it wasn't important or that it wouldn't be on the exam, and it actually was. And even though I don't know for sure, I'm certain I got that question wrong. Housing affordability, John spoke about this a bit, knowing the different housing ratios depending on the loan that you're using. The 4 C's of credit, those came up. Understand what those are. Understand the basics for qualifying for a loan. So they perhaps might provide you with a question that says, here's a scenario of a person, which loan would you recommend? Or chat with them about. And so that's something you'll need to know. So as I wrap up, and thank you so much for inviting me to be on this call, I guess what I really just want to do more than anything or the biggest tip that I can provide is to understand that if you are a counselor and you're in line to take this exam, you probably know so much, and you certainly probably know so much more than I did going into this. So don't hesitate to take the exam because you're afraid that you'll fail, because if you fail, you get to take it again. It's really, truly not a big deal. I don't think HUD's out there counting how many times you're taking this exam. They simply just want people to take it. It really provides an even playing field for what we do every day. And I was certainly one of those on the front side when they started talking about this exam that said, dang, it's just not fair. I shouldn't have to figure this stuff out. But because it was required, I did figure out enough to pass. And in doing so, I learned a lot more about how to be a better housing counselor. So that was really insightful. And as Oprah would say, an aha moment for me. I did learn a lot from all the studying. So you can do it. And again, if you don't pass it, just sign back up. I mean, study a little bit more. They'll give you some guidelines in areas that you need additional studying if you have a fail. And that just gives you, it just should propel you to study a bit more and to take the exam again. So thank you.
Great, Colleen, thank you. And for people listening, if you've got questions or items you want to headline, please use the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do Q&A at the end of the talk. But use that now and get yourself in the queue. Okay, and Jamila.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. So thanks, everyone. This is obviously a really valuable conversation, and I love all the different perspectives. We wanted to share ours as well. As the National Urban League, we are a comprehensive housing counseling grant intermediary, and we subgrant to 30 affiliates in cities across the country and almost as many states. So oftentimes what we're trying to do is distill somewhat complicated information in a way that our affiliates can really understand and then use to hit the ground running. So I'll tell you how we approached the exam to date. What we did was send out a call to about 10 affiliates asking them whether or not they'd be interested in participating in a scholarship that we provided to cover the cost of training and testing in advance of our annual training conference. About half of those we invited took us up on the offer, and they had about 40 to 45 days to take the exam and then come to our annual training conference and share their feedback with the rest of our colleagues. So we kind of treated them as a beta testing group so that we could all learn from their experience and ideally best practices. The only requirement that we had in terms of the scholarship was that, one, they be willing to share their experience, but two, that the housing directors at our agencies were the ones that sat for the exam. We thought it important to focus on housing directors in the early stages of this in order to ensure that the agency is guaranteed to receive HUD funding, since we know that that's part of the regulation. So we started with some general feedback on the exam. Most of you probably know already that it costs $60 online versus $100 in person. Lots of people were attracted to the online price because of convenience, but also obviously it's a bit lower. We wanted to make sure, though, that people also knew that if you didn't have a webcam that fit the proctoring requirements, that could be an additional cost. So in some cases, it's a nearly identical out-of-pocket expense. Also, we wanted to remind people that the exam costs are reimbursable and if they're billed to the Comprehensive Housing Counseling Grant Program. A score of 500 or higher is needed to pass, and there are 90 questions. Some of what threw our test takers off a little bit is that the test does not indicate whether the response is accurate as you go through each question. So you're kind of just taking it somewhat in the blind in that regard until you learn whether or not you've passed or not. And then after the exam is taken, feedback is emailed to the test taker within 2 weeks. And that feedback reads very much the same way as the practice exam. It doesn't, again, tell you which questions you got wrong. It only tells you the amount of study needed in the module if all the questions weren't answered correctly. The other thing that we went through were some of the logistics. So that was the overview of the exam, some things to be aware of. We also talked about things to be aware of in the actual logistics of taking the test. You can register and take the exam on the same day, which is great to know, but you may not log in late. You might be able to get away with a few minutes, but if you're late more than that, you're likely going to need to reschedule and pay an additional fee to take the exam. As I mentioned, you also need an external camera if you're going to take the test online, and the test taker's entire upper torso has to be visible. That includes your face, hands, the keyboard, and the proctor also must be able to view the test taker's screen. You cannot wear any jewelry, we were told, and if you're not in the frame of the camera at any particular time, you're kicked out of the test. And this is obviously, evidence of the proctor wanting to make sure that there's no cheating or otherwise ineligible assistance going on. I think we had someone who was interrupted. Someone wanted to come into their office during the test. That was also a problem. So you want to make sure that you're completely private and uninterrupted during the exam taking. We also learned that you want to get your IT team involved early. Sentinel Secure is a software that has to be installed on the workstation, and some of us, myself for one, need my IT person to get past the administrative rights on my computer login in order to install any new software. So that's something that you want to be aware of if you want to take the test online. And then calculators, books, and papers are not permitted. However, an online calculator is provided. So I think I mentioned that we didn't give a whole lot of prep time between offering the scholarship and having our test takers share their results. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned that the scholarship was fairly conservative. It was $500 per affiliate. With that $500, they could choose, in addition to the housing director, who else might be willing to take the exam, how many times they wanted to take the exam, whether they wanted to use the majority of the money on taking the test multiple times versus doing some coursework. So how the money was used was completely up to them. Most of our test takers, and we also, I should say, encourage people really to take the test in the blind. We were really curious how much prior experience would be enough to pass the test versus where additional study was needed. So lots of people did elect to take the practice test anyway and use the HUD study guides as well. They should have. We are a group of perfectionists. And what we learned from the practice test is that really the areas in which our counselors were working day to day, makes sense, is where they performed the highest, where they did really well. The areas where they were not as familiar, typically significant study was needed. And so I think Colleen already talked about using the HUD study guide as a way to really beef up on those areas. We also did get some feedback that the study guide and sometimes even the practice test were not presented in the same format as the actual test. So learning the information is really important as opposed to learning the format, if that makes sense. And so as a result of the beta testers that we had for taking the exam, we also had some best practices that came out of this. And I'll share 3 of them. One is that our affiliates found it helpful to create study groups that would go through HUD study guides to discuss and debate information, build team chemistry, and everyone's base of knowledge. The one drawback to that could be the amount of time that's needed to go through all of the modules, especially when your clients and other agency business are competing for that same time. Another best practice was to do group practice exams. So that would mean everyone sitting around the computer at the same time to go through one practice test. It reduced test-taking anxiety and therefore built confidence. And ideally, as a staff, you're reaching consensus on the answers and then, kind of seeing what the result is. And then the last suggestion was to do individual practice tests in the proctoring environment. So at a designated time, at your desk, allotting 2 hours, but in this same kind of practice environment, leaving a conference call or phone line open to phone a friend. So you'd be taking the practice test yourself, but if you needed some additional help, you could call a colleague. So overall, those were our takeaways, and we'd be happy to answer any questions from the call on our process. The one thing that I'll actually just say before turning it over is that we too found that the fair housing regulations, protected classes, calculating lender ratios, both front and back end, and determining affordability, and various loan products were important areas of study. So thanks.
Excellent, and Jamila, thank you so much. So Joanne?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining this call today, and thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm going to offer that I've been in the conversation, working on curriculum development and presentation of this preparation course on behalf of NeighborWorks pretty much since the day we heard that it was coming down our way. With that being said,
Joanne,
yes.
You're not coming through as clearly as you were earlier. I don't know if there's anything different.
Oh, goodness. Is that better? Are you hearing me any better at this point?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for telling me. So, again, I just wanted to offer from the context of having been with many of the counselors across the country in preparation for this test, and it's impressive. First of all, the work that is done on the ground by the housing counseling industry never ceases to amaze me. But with that in mind, I wanted to offer that what you're hearing today from these experts and this collaboration of experts is that the test is totally doable. And I would say that I want to just focus on some of those highlights and tips, but as an offer reassurance. Many of us in our adult lives were not maybe accustomed to the testing that's come our way, but nonetheless, take full account of these resources that have been offered today. I would say specifically what Dawn Bonin has developed with the video is impressive and will give you countless saved hours of approach, how you would approach the test, look at his clues, think a lot about what he told you percentage-wise about what to expect on the test. So the single focus mindedness of the majority of the questions, but preparation for knowing some of those combined concepts as it relates to different areas. I think he mentioned a couple of examples of multi-layer and multi-area questions. Everyone's feedback across the country continues to be consistent and synonymous with what you heard today around timelines and knowing dates and remembering how things happen in what order. And in the areas that you're not familiar with, again, give yourselves a break. It's not unusual that if we didn't focus on a specific content area, may approach it with a little bit of hesitation. But every single thing you need to know, as was, I think, commented on a couple of times already today, is within that study guide, and it's within the HUD material. So one of the things I like to encourage counselors globally to think about is, in those taking a test, it's not obviously not just housing counselors have access to this, but test takers. Think about your learning styles. And so HUD is presented and then industry is presenting multiple avenues for us to learn the best way that we learn. So if you have a sense of that, utilize it. If it's that you do best studying alone, think about giving yourself a break. Cramming, we know more and more about cramming not necessarily being the best approach when we try to study something. Using some of the methodologies where you do a 30-minute study and a 5-minute break, repeat that cycle and then take a longer break. But I loved hearing the tremendous feedback and best practices that we just heard from the groups that the Urban League pulled together. So I've across the country heard of the other groups doing study groups at the agency. And of course, I recognize, as was stated, that can be time consuming, but again, we've heard that it's a proven practice. So whether it's working alone, working in those groups, test taking, practice test taking, don't be afraid of failing the exam. I know there's a monetary cost involved, but it's not so huge. And otherwise, I'd just like to wrap up and remind everyone that everything you need to know is out there on HUD's website. You've got access to experts here on this call, the materials that are being shared with you, both verbally and in writing, but mix up what you're doing. So approach your study in a different way, just like we get invigoration from changing up our methodologies with regard to how we work. Think about that the same, and reach out to others and work as a team. We keep hearing that really has been an effective methodology and approach. So with all that, I would tell you that I've heard on this call excellent tips, things I've not heard in the classroom. Obviously, no one of us has all the tips and tricks, but what you heard today is monumental and should be very significantly helpful as you approach this national certification. And congratulations to all of us for having this offer made to us. So thank you all, and I'll pass it back to Bruce.
Excellent. Thank you all. So let's see. So Matthew, do we have questions in the queue?
We do. We've had a bunch of questions. So first, there were a few questions about pass rates and kind of numbers of folks who have passed. As far as I know, HUD hasn't released any data, have they, on pass rates and that kind of thing?
They have not. They are asking that people take the tests because they need to refine the testing protocols based on what the experience is. So they want us to get more people in the system, but they have not told us either the number of people taking the test or what the pass fail rate is.
And so then do any of the folks who are on the call have anecdotal data as far as within your organizations, or does anyone have any data in terms of pass rates or anything that they can share?
So, Matthew, this is Colleen from Helena. I only know what's happening in our state. So currently in Montana, we've only had 2 counselors who have completed the exam. I do believe we have more scheduled. The goal for NeighborWorks Montana is to have all of their counselors certified by the end of 2018. But as far as I know, there are only 2 of us who have taken it, and as far as I know, both have passed. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'll just say from the national. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
As far as the National Urban League is concerned, our initial goal actually was not to pass, but to really understand how the test is designed through blind beta testing for the most part. So unfortunately, we don't have data on that. But what I have also heard anecdotally is that HUD is looking for at least 400 test takers for statistics that they can use to make the adjustments needed for the exam. So I think we can safely assume that they're not at 400 yet, and they are looking to encourage test taking. We've also heard that the test is currently being subsidized, and that subsidy, I believe, is meant to last through 2018. That could mean when the subsidy ends that the cost of exam will increase. So that's something that they may begin to talk about with more urgency as a way to get more people to take the test.
And a few folks have kind of chimed in with their own anecdotal evidence. Washington State, 4 out of 10 at an agency have passed, 1 out of 1 passing on the first try, and 0 of 4 at another one. So it seems like it's kind of all over the place a little bit. All right. Someone asked for folks who are not super proficient with computers, were there any issues with the online calculator, or was that relatively useful, or is that a potential issue for folks too?
We didn't have any glitches reported. So I think that would mean that it worked okay. But that's a great follow-up question to kind of figure out if there were problems with it. We didn't get any indication that there were any.
So Matthew, this is...
Go ahead.
So Matthew, this is Colleen again. I will tell you just from my experience, and I did take the exam in my office. Remember, again, I took it early on, and so there were issues with the online calculator, yes. I think they've resolved those now.
Okay, and we did have a bunch of people chime in. Someone said they couldn't use the calculator. Someone said easy and simple. So maybe the issues were the ones that Colleen just mentioned.
And Matthew, this is John. I have heard from a couple of test takers that if the online calculator is not functioning, they will allow you have to show it to them in your camera, but bring out an actual calculator and use that in as its place. Okay, and just one other tip to mention quickly is it seems like some people had an issue with the calculator having the slash sign for division rather than the traditional division sign, so that's maybe something for folks to be aware of.
So, so bringing a calculator to the test is a good thing to think about. So one thing that I'm glad that there are people who have taken the test who are on this call. One thing that we've asked to do is allow us to put together a little focus group of people who have taken the test to give them feedback about things like this issue that's already come up about that it's not specific enough when you get something wrong about what exactly is wrong, but in fact just tells you that you need to work in a certain area. And so that kind of feedback. So they were very generous and very eager to do this. So if you are if you've taken the test and you've got some very concrete kind of feedback you'd like to participate in this call, shoot me an email and we'll assemble a list to put that together.
And just one other kind of practical thing, someone flagged that they have the asterisk instead of the traditional X for multiplication. So those are kinds of things that folks need to know, I think, for the calculator. Colleen, I think you just mentioned again, but did you take the test proctored or online? Someone asked.
It was, well, I did it from my office, so it was online, but it was proctored. Yes. So I had the camera. Yes. Right.
Okay. Someone asked whether you all think it's necessary to study the HUD Housing Counseling Handbook for the exam.
No. This is Colleen. I've reviewed that handbook a few times. I'm not sure how a person would study that. I mean, if you had that ability, maybe it would be helpful. That's not a resource I went to, no.
And this is John. I did not use that resource, so I don't think that's necessary.
Great. Someone asked if you could give us an idea of how much time you spend studying, and then also if anybody did any of the prep courses. So they mentioned specifically the Unidos US and NeighborWorks, but I'm sure there's others as well.
So this is Colleen. I studied for about 2 years. I studied for a long time. It wasn't really until the website was up and the study guides were in place that I really began to study in earnest. I was super excited for the practice exam just so I could get a feel for what the testing might be like. I was not able to attend a NeighborWorks, an NTI training prep class, but I did attend one at RCAC, which was very helpful. Boy, I studied a lot. And yeah, I don't know how to say that any other way. I feel like I did study a lot, especially in the areas that were unfamiliar to me. I can't give you a timeline. I really just did it whenever I had time, but it was pretty substantial.
And this is John. I studied a lot too. Part of it is I do teach this topic for both RCAC and NeighborWorks, so I've read the study guide through its entirety, but I would say take my tip that I made earlier, which is in a section which requires memorization where maybe you're not so familiar, just use your cursor in the PDF of the study guide and drop data into a Microsoft Word document, formulate it in bullet points and so on, and just use that to study. I found that to be the best way to study the information I wasn't that familiar with. And in my case, that was the foreclosure categories, protocols, programs, etc.
And then someone chimed in to let us know they spend 100+ hours studying, so there's some quantification. Is the test timed?
Yes.
Yes.
Does anyone remember?
2 hours.
Okay.
You have 2 hours to complete the test. And my experience was that I was able to do, am I right, Colleen, 2 hours? Or is
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Nope, you're right.
And most of my experience was that I think I got through most of it, 80 to 85% of the questions within an hour and 15 minutes. That left me 45 minutes to go through the other questions that were really more challenging. And I don't think we brought this up, but there is a way in the test to set questions aside for later viewing. And then when you're finished the whole test, you then just get to go back and look at just those questions and focus on the ones that you wanted to skip.
And what's the mechanism for that? Can you just describe how that works so people can look for it?
Well, so I think I'm saying this right, Colleen, you took the test too. I believe as you go through, there's a button in the upper left-hand corner that says save for later, and then there's another wording of another question where you've answered it, but you want to check it again. So there's two ways to do it. But if you don't check one of those boxes and just click next, your answer is recorded and you won't get an opportunity to review it again. Colleen, did I say that right?
John, you are correct. So when I took it, of course, the first couple of questions were math, and they were very long questions. And so I had a slight panic attack early on, but goodness, if the whole exam is like this, I'm going to need 6 hours. But as soon as I realized that I could flag that without even answering it to come up for review at the end, really relieved a lot of my stress, and that's the approach I took. So I didn't even provide an answer for review later. I simply just chose the option to come back to it, and that worked really well. I flagged, I would say out of 90, I flagged 19.
Yeah, and I think I had said in my video, I flagged like 14 or 15 too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the best strategy is if it looks too hard, just flag it for I want to look at this later. Don't even attempt to answer it. And then get through all the ones you know within an hour to hour and 15 minutes, and then you have enough time to just allocate amongst the questions you've flagged for later.
And it also allows you an opportunity to build your confidence to see the questions you do know the answers to without getting so caught up in the very, very long story problem questions and feel a bit of anxiety about those because there's so much you have to work your way through to figure out an answer. So that was a great approach, is just to move it to the end. And my timeline for completion and review very similar to John's. Yeah.
And I would only add, Colleen and Bruce and the group, Matthew, that a good strategy that I heard yesterday on a session was to learn how to dissect the question. But one of the challenges with that is that you have to dissect it mentally in your head. You are not allowed to, on a piece of paper, write down the question, dissect it on a piece of paper and go, okay, let me circle the words that are key in here, which ones aren't relevant. So dissecting has to be done mentally in your brain without a piece of paper.
Correct.
I mean, what do you mean by dissecting? Why don't you explain that a tiny bit more?
Sometimes there are questions that have multiple layers of, not tricks,
Information.
possible, pardon me, Colleen?
Information, pieces of information.
Information that might be a word from the study guide, but it's not necessarily relevant to that particular question or the answer that you're seeking. It's not a trick, but it is a trick. They just put in a word that isn't really relevant. And so sometimes you have to go through and if you had a piece of paper, you could go, well, this isn't relevant to this question. This isn't relevant, but this piece is, so I'm going to focus on this, and then now I'm going to look at the answers. But you have to do that mentally. What I'm saying is you can't use a piece of paper and write down, oh, well, that word is an accurate word from the study guide, but it's not relevant to this question. It's a trick to get me caught up. And I found a couple of those were like that. Not to say that the test is tricky, but there are some questions like that.
And I'll just say some folks have kind of weighed in saying they would highly recommend doing it in person. My understanding, and please correct us if I'm wrong, is that you can use a calculator, you can have scrap paper, that kind of thing if you take the exam on site.
No, that was not my experience. I took it on site, and you only get a calculator if the on-screen calculator doesn't work. And no, I was at my proctoring site, which is a third-party site, I was given a blank desktop. They took my cell phone, wallet, everything, locked it up in a locker to make sure. Yeah.
Wow. So just to be clear, I may have been misunderstanding this all along. You can't go to. You were still proctored by someone. You didn't have a live proctor, is that right? And is that an option?
I did. I went to a third-party live proctored site, and they take it very seriously.
Wow, scrappy.
So I just should point out, Ellie Pepper sent me just a sketch of in the state of New York where the proctored sites were, and for a whole number of agencies, it's quite a distance away. So for some agencies, this may be a real trek, and so being able to do it online, just as a convenience thing, is a critical issue too.
And I just communicated with someone this morning via email who just took the test. They weren't willing to get on the call today and share their experience. They were ill, but they did say that it took them and their IT person 3 hours to work through all of the software platforms and cautions that were mentioned in this call that I put in the video that I gave you guys reference to, dealing with make sure you have administrator privileges, and Jamila mentioned that. It takes a while to do that. It took her and her IT person 3 hours to just get ready to do it in her office.
All right, and there were a couple questions about the software that you need. Is that, I mean, I'm sure they walk you through it, but is there anything else to say about that other than allow yourself plenty of time to get it squared away?
In my video, I do mention that it takes, the cautionary tale that I have is that it takes over your entire computer so that you don't have access to any of your Windows files, your taskbar, anything. And so if you're not ready and you start the process ready to take the exam and then find out that your camera isn't working correctly, you lose your opportunity to continue. They just kick you out. Or at least that was my experience. You lose your opportunity to continue. So you have to get out of the software that takes over your computer to get back into the Windows settings to make your camera work correctly. And that was the frustration that I had doing it in my home office. That's why I finally went to a third-party site. And I go through that in detail in my the recorded webinar that I gave the link to.
Great, thanks. And I'll just mention
so we've gone past the hour, and we're going to continue through. We won't go more than another half hour, but just so everybody knows, I think this is a very high level, excellent conversation, and and it's being recorded to answer that question, which I'm sure will come up. We do post this on our website and in the video library. So but we're going to keep the conversation going because this is exactly what people want to know.
And I will also just mention we unfortunately lost Njamile. She wasn't able to go past 2, so there were some questions that were kind of specific to her that we may not be able to answer, but we will do our best. Someone asked for the foreclosure section if you need to be familiar with new retention options or HAMP options. Can you comment? Anyone comment at all about the kind of retention options that were tested on?
Colleen, you can jump in when I'm done, but my recollection was you needed to know HAMP and you needed to know the FHA, not only options, including partial claims, et cetera, but disposition options if those options don't work. So what's the waterfall for disposition if the retention options waterfall doesn't work? So you need to know 2 layers there.
I would say, John and Matthew, that's exactly right. Now, I will tell you again, because I took this exam in August, we were still functioning off of information and programs that were no longer in place for foreclosure mitigation, and they have now updated their training modules. So if you're just now training for it, you should see updated information with regard to foreclosure mitigation, as I recall. I haven't studied the new information, but as I popped on the other day, I could see that they had updated some information. But we were still just using... Go ahead.
No, Colleen, I would say I would agree with that. And it was July of last year that they updated it. But they still asked questions about programs that I felt weren't still valid, but they kept them in there because they said this will be the roadmap for future loss mitigation challenges if and when they occur in the future. So that's why they kept some of the HAMP material and questions in there, even though it's not really an active program.
Yes.
This was an Njamile question that I'm going to try to take a swing at, but if anyone wants to jump in, please do. She had mentioned that she had heard that that the test is currently being subsidized, the cost of it. The way I understood what she was saying is they give the cost, they have the cost now that they published when they did the rule in the Federal Register. I think she was saying that her understanding was that could go up in the future, that essentially it's being kind of subsidized at the moment. I don't think that was she was stating that as a fact, but John, do you want to say anything else about that?
I believe that is true. It is subsidized, I believe, through September this calendar year. This fiscal year, sorry. At the 60, I believe it is in person, and 100 when you go proctored. That's my recollection. I don't have my computer's screens all up and running, and I believe that can go up to as high as 100 and a 160 when the subsidy expires. But the exact numbers, I may be off by a few dollars here or there.
All right. Someone asked what the deadline is for taking the test. Does somebody want to run through that?
3 years from August of 2017, so August of 2020.
So if you're working for a HUD certified agency and you're doing counseling, by that date you'll have to have passed the test.
Correct.
Could somebody just recap what the passing score is again, please?
I believe you get 9. There's a total possibility of 900. So it's a weighted average that they use. Some questions have more points associated with the correct answer than other. The total points are 900 on the 90 questions, but it's not 10 points per question. Some are 5 points, some are 15 points because they are multi-layered questions. And you need to get 500 points out of 900.
Okay. So I can't do 5/9 in my head, but about 55% of the possible
I
points.
didn't do that. So 500. Does that sound right to you, Colleen?
It does. Yes.
500 divided by 900. 55%, I believe. Yeah, that was my recollection.
Okay. Someone asked if there's only one version of the test. I assume that everyone who, there's more than one set of questions.
So between Colleen and I, we've chatted offline, and I believe there are more than one set of questions.
Yes. Yeah.
And will you know immediately whether or not you passed the test?
Yes.
Yes, that was my experience, yes. So immediately
Yes.
it tells you you passed or you failed, and then if you failed, it says these are the sections that you either additional study is needed, additional study is required, additional study is recommended. They have different terms based upon how well you did in that subsection of the study guide.
And can you confirm that you have to completely clear your desk and walls and show them this was done before taking it online?
Colleen, you want to do that one?
Absolutely. So I did not clear my walls. I did absolutely clear everything away from my desk. I did not have anything out that they would in any way, like my cell phone wasn't laying on the desktop or anything like that. So yeah, absolutely. I made sure it was clear. And then once they come on, and I will just interject here, it would be my recommendation that you go to a site, to a testing site, because even though I successfully did it in my office, I scheduled the very earliest time that I could to be in the building where I knew no one would come to my door. So my testing started somewhere around 5 o'clock in the morning. But even having said that, the camera, throughout the process of my test, if I had a question, for example, the calculator I felt was not working correctly, there was no place for me to go, here's a question I have to you, whoever is watching me out there. But rather, when something comes up that they don't like, and this was the case for me, my camera wasn't far enough back and they couldn't see all of my screen. So they just simply stopped the test. And then they would come on and type something at the bottom and say, I'm unable to see this. Your test has been halted until I can verify what I'm looking at. And then I had to make some adjustments. So yeah, I'm going to say that they certainly do hold you to that, whatever their guidelines are for what your testing area should be if you decide to do it in your office. Yes, they're really watching that.
And they have a test taker guide in the HUDhousingcounselors.com website. I refer to it in the little recording video. It's a PDF that explains all of the requirements. I, again, strongly urge everyone to really read that. I did not. Hence, I lost a lot of money trying to make it work, but was unsuccessful.
And they're currently not refunding those dollars, just so you know. Because same thing happened with me, and I did not get a refund, although I requested it.
Yeah, I didn't even get a response back.
There have been a few questions about whether you can use a financial calculator or any kind of a special calculator. It sounds like you all are saying that they give you just a regular simple calculator, and that's your only option, correct?
On screen,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
On screen, and only if that doesn't work do they say, show us the calculator you're using, make sure it's visible to us in the camera, we'll let you use that to finish up. I've only heard one person say that happened.
All right. Somebody asked, and I assume it's the case that whether it's compatible for both Macs and PCs. I don't know if anyone knows that specifically, but
I don't know.
I'm assuming that it would be Mac compatible as well. Sorry, I threw the questions that I've curated, so it's going to just take me a second here. This is probably more of a HUD question, but somebody had asked about if there's any accommodations for folks with learning disabilities. I don't know if anyone can comment on that.
That's a good question.
That's probably a HUD question that we should run by them. Someone flagged that the Counselor's Corner also has an excellent webinar and a certificate course as well. So folks can check that out if they're looking for additional materials.
I agree with that.
Somebody just, by way of comment, said they were able to go back and review all of their answers before hitting finish.
I was not.
I was not either.
If you don't, my experience is that if you don't flag it, you don't get the opportunity to do that. That was my experience.
Wow.
And it sounds like, Colleen, that was yours too.
That was my experience as well. Yes, I only was able to review just the ones I had flagged.
So just to clarify, there's been a few other questions on the kind of passing score. First off, it's you don't get a letter grade. It's just a matter of pass or fail, correct?
Yes.
And we said, so is it 90 questions? And I'm sorry, John, could you just go back? Is it 90 questions? You said some are worth
5. It is 90 questions.
Okay.
Yeah, but each
so it's
question
not necessarily
is not
you need to get 50 questions right. Okay, sorry, if you could just finish that.
Because each question has different weighting, and we don't know what that is. But it's not 10 points per question. Some are worth more than 10 points. Others are worth less than 10.
All right. Sorry, we've got some repeats in here. Is the test multiple choice?
Yep.
So it's all multiple choice, is that right? So even the DTI questions, that sort of thing, they're all, you have 4 or 5 ones you have to choose between.
Yes, they were all. Yes, I would agree that that's correct, and I don't recall ever having more than 4 choices.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Is there any opportunity for a bathroom break during the test?
No.
I didn't think about it.
So prepare properly, people.
Yeah. No, because then you could potentially be asking someone else for an answer.
Just someone asked if they have to purchase a camera to take the test in their office. Could someone just go back over that, please?
So the answer to that would be yes. Criterion, the software developer of the test, has a camera you can purchase. In my video that I relate to, I recommend buying theirs because the one I bought at Best Buy barely met their specs, and it was, $30 versus $59 or something. So yes, you do have to have a camera. You cannot use your laptop camera. It's got to be a distinct, separate camera from your computer that is mounted to watch you and your computer. Think of like a stepladder, putting it on top of a stepladder next to you. That's the kind of image they want to see of your desktop and you.
So make sure you purchase one that has, at least maybe even a 2.5 to a 3 foot wire, so it can come from your computer and be far enough away from you.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Someone just confirmed that we had talked about the subsidy earlier, that it is subsidized through 9/30/18. Okay, so someone asked what about the TILA and good faith estimate. Will the questions be on the new and combined forms? Can anyone answer?
I would imagine that to be the case. I just don't remember exactly.
And just speaking from my experience with the test, really it spent more time on the older documents, but there was a question that specifically said what replaced TILA, if you will. So they're referencing the new forms, but most of everything that was in the study guide, at least the time I went through it, was on the older information.
And Colleen, just since you took yours in August, I remember participating little work group to say what materials in the study guide were outdated, and that was one of them. So I think
Yes.
it's been updated since then.
I believe it has, yes. And you can tell that if it has been on the website, on their on their the HUD study website, they're going to show you what they updated. So.
Great. And I'm just going to say there are quite a lot of questions left. We'll keep going as long. I'm not sure how available everyone is or if we're going to stop at 2:30, but just a heads up, we may not be able to get to all the questions. Someone had asked, their understanding is that you can bill HUD for the exam fee. Does anyone know if that's correct?
No.
Well, you can bill the
Joanna,
HUD
you still on?
contract. Yes, you can bill your HUD contract. Yes.
Okay.
Doesn't mean any money, right? It's just the same money. So it's right. Yes.
Somebody asked if there was any kind of waiting period if you don't pass for you to retake it. My understanding is you could take it the next day if you wanted to. Is that correct?
I believe you can. Yeah, I believe you can take it immediately. Yes, you just have to schedule another time.
That was my mistake. I tried to log in and say, how about in 20 minutes?
Oh, okay.
But if your camera isn't ready, it still isn't ready.
Yes.
Okay.
So just wait a minute.
I believe the test is also available in Spanish. Does anyone verify that?
I believe that to be accurate.
And do they give you an actual number score or just say that you passed the test?
Pass, fail.
Okay. And do you get any kind of like printed out paper results, or it just lets you know online that you passed?
I believe you get an email, that was my experience, to your inbox saying that here's your results. And if it was passed, that's great. If it's failed, it then says these are the sections that you need more work on. These are the sections we recommend you do more work. These are the ones where it's needed that you do more study. So they give you some clues.
And just to follow up on the camera, so someone's asking if they have a camera built into their computer. It sounds like what you're saying, though, is the camera needs to be positioned behind you so it can show your desk and everything. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you need to have an external camera set up behind you?
External, yeah. And I go through all that logistics in that video. You really need to not use your cameras, the camera in the lid of your laptop. It's got to be an external, and Colleen said it correctly, at least 3 feet of USB cord so it can be positioned high enough kind of behind your right or left shoulder where it can see everything that's going on, including who you are, because it's got to match the picture that you're taking to make sure that someone else isn't sitting in your place.
Just to go back over, there were some more questions on the calculator. It sounds like from comments people made that one thing that threw people off is using the asterisk sign for multiplication and the forward slash or backslash. I get my slashes confused. For division, is that correct?
Colleen, you'll have to jump in. I don't have a good memory on that.
So I won't be able to jump in because my calculator did not work. So they, after some pausing of my exam, they were able to see the calculator, which I had turned off on my desk, but it's just a straight type of calculator. There's nothing fantastic about it, and they allowed me to turn that on and use that to continue my exam.
But it is just a digital, you just use your mouse to click 1, 2, 3, and then times would be the asterisk. 33% slash is divide. Yeah, you need to be able to function like that.
All right. John, there's a request from Margaret Wooten for you to go do a training. I'm assuming you know Margaret, and she asked you to contact her if you're available.
In Chicago, I would love to, so thank you.
So we have 6 minutes left.
Someone just made the comment that at the proctor site you can ask the proctor about bathroom breaks, so maybe it is possible there. Sorry, there's a lot of repeat questions. What was the 28 subsidy based on? I'm assuming that's going back to the the HUD subsidizing the cost. I'm not quite sure what the question there is, though. There were a few folks who had asked about how to go about figuring out where the proctored sites are. If you don't want to do it in the office, that's just the HUD website. Is that correct?
So embedded in the HUDhousingcounselors.com, when you go to the test center link, they give you access to a map of the USA, and you type in your zip code and it tells you what are the closest ones closest to you.
Somebody asked for a list of questions and answers, which I assume we're not going to be supplying.
Nice try.
I can't remember them.
But so HUD has been very clear about not repeating the questions so that people aren't gaming the test.
Right.
All right. There are a few others, but a lot of them are kind of technical and probably more kind of HUD questions. So why don't we? I think we got through quite a lot there.
So we have good. So thank you so much, everybody. As just to repeat, for those that have taken the test, we'll pull together a kind of a focus group that will talk with HUD about things that might be improved on the test or concerns we've got. So that's please shoot me an email if you'd like to be part of that group. But it's been a terrific conversation. Thank you very much for all the participants. And a quick reminder that next week, on February 1st, we'll have Sarah Jarick on our next call, and that should be a high content call as well. If you're not on the Leaders in Housing Counseling call and would like on the listserv and like to be, go to our website, which will be on the back page of this slide deck. If we can move on to the next slide. And I'm going to just make one quick plug for joining NHRC. So we're a membership organization. You can do that you can either email me directly and I'll send you the membership form, or you could go to the website and click through on the membership section through the membership page. But this allows us to stay independent and does our good work, represents really a fifth of our budget, and is very valuable to our work, and has allowed us to do a lot of the things we're doing like this today. So there you can see the our website link. So, but thank you, everybody. We had a heavy participation on the call today, and it was I thought excellent questions and very good presentations, very helpful. We'll be glad to talk with you at the beginning of February for our next call. Thanks a lot.